how do you feel the pulses of the country in terms of the state of the economy?
The state of the economy is not felt by economists. It's felt by the people who either don't have adequate income, or they've lost their jobs, or they've lost their businesses. Those are the people who feel the state of the economy. The economists can only tell you sort of magnitudes if we have data. But basically, the state of the world economy is not good because of Corona. But the state of Kenya economy was not good even before Corona. Because for the last 7 or 8 years, the government, as I said, has been very irresponsible with its finances. It's borrowed lots of money, more than we ever done before. A lot of it very, very expensive money, both locally and from abroad. And it has invested that money in wasteful projects. Quite a lot of it has been stolen. And but we now have to pay for it. And that payment is coming from revenue. And therefore, when that revenue is repaying interest on that debt, it means that other things are not being paid for. So that's one thing. So the public finances are in a very bad state. Secondly, that the way the government has been spending that money, deficit financing and that these big projects and all sorts of things, they distort the economy quite a lot. So they have weakened the economy. Partly because a lot of that money, in fact half of it, has been borrowed from domestic banks. And when the government borrows money from domestic banks, that money is not available for local businesses. In economics, we call that crowding out. So the government has crowded out the private sector. And because of crowding out the private sector, then the private sector itself is weak. And because the private sector economy is weak, it also hurts government revenue because it's the private sector which pays taxes. The productive economy is the one which pays taxes. So the government shoots itself on both feet. First, it wastes money, and the money it wastes is not available to the private sector, so it hurts its revenue. So it is repaying this debt from even less revenue than it would have if it had not borrowed. Thirdly, because the government has been so busy doing those wasteful infrastructure projects, it really hasn't been doing the things that it actually ought to do to help the economy. And those are the things. If you listen to this government, it's very rare that you hear it talking of production.
Hardly.
Yeah, the word production has disappeared from our economic lexicon.
It's about consumption.
The word productivity, which is the most important thing that the government should be concerned about, doesn't exist at all. So if your productivity is not growing, but you say that your economy is growing by 5-6%. But if you look at that economy closely, you notice that productivity is stagnant or falling. If your economy is growing and your productivity is falling, it means that you're actually consuming capital. Yeah, and that's what you're doing. We are consuming debt.
Come on, Akula stock.
Yes, we're eating. That's exactly what we are doing. So we are consuming capital. So because we are consuming capital, that means that sooner or later, if you're a business and you're consuming your stock, of course, sooner or later there will be a day of reckoning. Yes, we have seen it happen to quite a number of our large corporations. We've seen it happen to Kenya Airways. We've seen it happen to Nakumatt and others, and Uchumi. So that's the way we are running the economy, the same way we run Mumias and Kenya Airways and whatever. The only difference is that, of course, the country cannot close shop and be auctioned off. But just means that it has very long-term consequences instead of poverty, being able to create jobs, and it can actually create serious political problems at some point.
All right. That's amazing. Now, another thing is the issues of loan. Uhuru Kenyatta is just from France. He is going to secure another 180 billion loan. The question is, we've continued to take loans ever since Jubilee government came to power. And you're lucky enough to have experienced both regimes, which I would not want to go to that at this point. But let's narrow it down to Uhuru Kenyatta. Uhuru Kenyatta has almost sustained the government on loans. He has gone and taken another loan of 180 billion at a time when we are complaining that the economy is not doing well. And like you said, we have zero production. It's like you're taking in money to a hole. Nothing is coming back. What do you think is, can Kenya sustain its loan burden?
Uhuru Kenyatta is in a very, the Kenya economy, I've been saying this for a long time, for the last 7 or 8 years. And telling you continue. I actually wrote the first op-ed warning the government about the route it was headed in 2014. I remember it's early 2014. Now you can imagine how long that ago that is. And they've been doing the same thing. So now you are in what I call a straitjacket. Uhuru has put the country in a straitjacket. The situation is this. You have been sustaining what you're calling economic growth by deficit financing. Yeah, that's the data. So you've been borrowing something like 7 to 8% of GDP a year. Then that's what you're calling, you're financing all these wasteful projects and calling it economic growth. Basically, you're just building monuments, okay, and calling it growth. Now, in sort of best practice, there's a rule of thumb. You really, if economy is doing well, and you sort of, you should not exceed, you should be running a deficit of no more than 3% of GDP regularly, so that you can have the headroom that if you have a crisis, you can ramp that up to stimulate the economy. You can ramp up that up to 4 or 5 or even 6, but for no more than a year or two. Then you go back to something like 3% or below. We call that fiscal space. You preserve headroom to be able to mitigate shocks. Now, if you've been running a deficit of 8% in normal times, yeah, you have no capacity to mitigate shocks. Okay? So when Corona came, we had no headroom to be able to mitigate shocks. If you look at countries which were able to ramp up their spending very quickly, they were running deficits of 2, 3, 4% of GDP. Then within a very short time, you can get that up even to 6 or 7. And then when the shock subsides, you go down to normal. The problem is that we've been operating abnormally. Yeah, you've been operating with an abnormal deficit for so long now that the economy is addicted to that deficit. Okay? You have an addiction.
It's an opium.
Yes. You've got an addiction called deficit spending. And Uhuru is coming to the end of his term. Now, because the economy is addicted to deficit spending, if you start behaving responsibly now, what you call fiscal consolidation, the economy is going to start having withdrawal symptoms. Okay? Now, and obviously, he does not want withdrawal symptoms as he is leaving office. The other thing is that Uhuru has no meaningful economic achievements to show, really. His big flagship project was the railway. And as I told him from the outset, that was a white elephant. And that turned out to be the case. So I think he's desperate for a legacy project.
Which it doesn't seem to be coming.
And he seems to think that a legacy project has to be brick and mortar. Something, monument, a monument that he'll be remembered for.
Some sort of a rock.
Yeah, some sort of a monument. So he wants to build this thing they're building on Mombasa Road. I think this road, he wants to finance this dual carriageway to Nakuru. Incidentally, if we were planning properly, those are things we can actually finance locally.
Without seeking
slowly,
loans.
Without seeking loans. But the other thing is that he is, because he for somebody who studied economics, he's actually very not knowledgeable at all in economics and finance. So he's very gullible to these financiers who come and sell you. They are all snake oil salesmen. They come and sell you these big projects, financing structures, PPP, all sorts of things. And he's very gullible to that. And of course, that is compounded by corruption, because if you or your people are also getting cuts from those projects,
then it's good for business.
Then it's good for business. If you have got businesses, family businesses, which are in the construction sector,
And are bound to benefit.
and are bound to benefit, then you are looking at this from a different lens than the public interest. So he's got a cocktail of things which predispose him to keep moving in that direction. Yeah, and because if you start dealing with the problem now, that problem first causes pain before gain, and of course you don't want just pain during your last year or two in office, and the gains come thereafter. So what we can expect Uhuru Kenyatta to do is to keep kicking the can down the road. Hope he can maintain this abnormal stimulus for the next 2 years. That something doesn't happen. You know, you can always get that straw which breaks the camel's back, and the thing comes tumbling down. But the thing will come tumbling down at some point. It's really a matter of when, not whether.
Not if.
Yeah, it's not whether, it's when.